In the spring of 2016, a maintenance crew inspecting ancient aqueducts beneath the city of Matera in southern Italy discovered a sealed chamber that hadn't appeared on any archaeological survey. The entrance was small, barely visible, a gap between fitted limestone blocks that had shifted slightly due to centuries of water seepage. When they widened the opening and directed lights inside, they found a circular chamber, approximately 7 meters in diameter, and inside 19 people, arranged in concentric rings, 3 circles. The outer ring contained 8 bodies. The middle ring held 6. The innermost ring contained 5, all facing outward toward the walls. No skeletal trauma, no signs of violence, no evidence of entrapment or collapse. Just 19 people who had positioned themselves in precise formation and remained there until death. But here's what made the crew immediately contact archaeological authorities. The entrance they had found wasn't the original entrance. On the opposite side of the chamber, there was another opening, completely sealed, filled with fitted limestone blocks, clay mortar, and compacted earth. And the tool marks on those blocks, the scrapes, the compression patterns, the mortar application all faced inward. The chamber had been sealed from the inside, by the people who were still in it. The maintenance supervisor's report to the Soprintendenza Archeologica contained one observation that would define the investigation. They closed themselves in, and then they turned their backs to the door. This is the story of 19 people who sealed their own tomb and spent their final moments facing stone walls instead of freedom. 12,000 years ago, the region around what is now Matera was transitioning from the Paleolithic to the Mesolithic, a period of rapid environmental and cultural change as the last ice age ended and climates warmed. This was territory occupied by late Epigravettian populations, anatomically modern humans adapting to changing landscapes. As glaciers retreated and sea levels rose, forests expanded into former steppes. Prey animals shifted. Settlement patterns evolved. People who had survived by hunting mammoth and reindeer on open tundra now hunted red deer and wild boar in expanding woodlands. They exploited new resources, fish, shellfish, wild cereals, nuts, and they modified natural rock shelters extensively. The Matera region is famous for its sassy ancient cave dwellings carved into soft limestone. Some show evidence of occupation spanning thousands of years, continuous modification, expansion, adaptation to changing needs. Most caves show evidence of practical use: hearths for cooking, storage niches for supplies, drainage channels for water management. But some caves were different. Some showed evidence of ritual closure, deliberate sealing, permanent abandonment. Usually these were small chambers, burial spaces, locations where specific individuals or groups had been laid to rest and then separated from the living world through stone barriers. But the chamber discovered in 2016, designated Camera del Silenzio by the research team, was different. It wasn't a burial chamber where bodies had been placed after death. It was a space where living people had gathered, sealed the entrance, and then died together. Dr. Francesca Romano, lead archaeologist from the University of Basilicata, directed the excavation. Her initial assessment noted the chamber's artificial modifications. The walls had been smoothed, the floor had been leveled, ventilation channels had been deliberately blocked with clay. Someone had converted a natural cavity into a controlled environment, isolated, sealed, cut off from airflow. Her preliminary report included this observation. The modifications suggest intentional creation of terminal conditions. This space was designed for closure. The excavation of Camera del Silenzio took 28 months. The site's location beneath active infrastructure required careful coordination. The sealed entrance required painstaking documentation before removal. What Dr. Romano's team uncovered was methodical, final, and increasingly deliberate. First, the entrance seal. The blocked opening was approximately 1.2 meters high and 80 centimeters wide, large enough for an adult to pass through while crawling. The seal consisted of 3 layers. The innermost layer, closest to the chamber interior, was fitted limestone blocks. No mortar, precisely stacked. The middle layer was clay mixed with crushed limestone and organic binder, packed tightly into gaps between stones. The outer layer was compacted earth and smaller stones, filled to the ceiling, completely closing the passage. Engineering analysis of the construction sequence confirmed what the tool marks suggested. The work had been done from inside the chamber. Someone had stacked stones, applied mortar, and packed earth while standing in the space they were sealing. Dr. Romano brought in Dr. Marco De Lucci, a specialist in ancient construction techniques. His analysis estimated the sealing would have required 8 to 12 hours of continuous work, meaning someone had spent half a day building a wall that would trap them inside, and the others had waited while that work was completed. Second, the chamber modifications. The circular space showed evidence of careful preparation. Natural fissures in the limestone walls had been filled with clay. Small ventilation cracks near the ceiling had been plugged. The floor had been covered with a thin layer of crushed limestone, creating a smooth, level surface. And around the perimeter of the chamber, someone had carved a continuous groove, a shallow channel approximately 5 centimeters wide and 3 centimeters deep, running along the base of the walls. Dr. Romano initially thought it might be drainage, but chemical analysis revealed something else. The groove contained residue, organic compounds, lipids and proteins consistent with rendered animal fat mixed with plant resins. The groove had been filled with some kind of paste or compound before the people entered. Third, the arrangement. The 19 individuals were positioned in 3 concentric circles, all sitting, legs crossed, back straight, hands resting in laps. But unlike other discoveries where bodies faced inward toward each other or toward a central point, these individuals faced outward. Each person sat facing the wall, looking at stone, backs to the center of the chamber. When forensic archaeologists mapped the positions, the precision became clear. Each person was positioned exactly opposite one of the 19 others across the chamber diameter. If you drew a straight line through the center from any seated figure, it would pass directly through another seated figure on the opposite side. They had arranged themselves in geometric opposition, paired across empty space, facing away from their pairs toward blank walls. Fourth, the demographics. Osteological analysis revealed the 19 individuals ranged in age from approximately 20 to 65. There were men and women, young adults and mature adults. No children, no adolescents, no elderly individuals beyond their 60s. This was a selected group, adults in their productive years, people capable of understanding and executing complex decisions. Genetic analysis suggested multiple family lines but close community ties. Several individuals shared mitochondrial DNA. Others showed signatures consistent with long-term residence in the same region. Isotope analysis confirmed they had lived in the Matera area for most of their lives. Dietary patterns indicated mixed subsistence hunted game, gathered plants, possibly early cultivation of wild cereals. And they were healthy. No pathological markers, no signs of disease, no skeletal evidence of malnutrition or chronic illness. Whatever brought them into that chamber, it wasn't desperation or medical crisis. Over the next year, Dr. Romano's team conducted detailed analysis of the chamber environment and skeletal remains. What they discovered suggested a timeline both rapid and ritualized. Analysis of the chamber atmosphere preserved in sealed calcite formations revealed something unexpected. Elevated carbon dioxide levels, far higher than normal cave environments. The chamber had poor ventilation even before the entrance was sealed. After sealing, air exchange would have been minimal to non-existent. Dr. Romano brought in Dr. Giulia Marchetti, a specialist in cave atmospherics and human physiology. Her calculations were precise. In a sealed chamber of this size with 19 people, oxygen would be depleted and carbon dioxide would reach dangerous levels within approximately 12 to 18 hours. The 19 people would have felt the effects progressively: headache, dizziness, confusion, difficulty breathing, eventually unconsciousness and death. They would have known it was happening. They would have felt themselves dying, and the evidence suggested they had maintained their positions throughout. Skeletal analysis by Dr. Antonio Ferri, a bioarchaeologist specializing in taphonomy, revealed something subtle but significant. The positioning of vertebrae and pelvic bones suggested the individuals had remained seated upright until very close to death. No slumping, no collapse, no evidence of attempting to lie down or seek more comfortable positions. They had sat facing the walls while the air grew toxic, but the most disturbing evidence came from the walls themselves. When Dr. Romano examined the limestone surfaces at the level where the seated figures would have been looking, she noticed marks, faint, barely visible. Not carvings, not paintings, contact marks. Using oblique lighting and digital enhancement, she revealed the pattern. Handprints, dozens of them, pressed against the walls at eye level for seated individuals. The prints weren't painted. They were compression marks, places where hands had pressed against limestone with enough force and duration to leave microscopic indentations and transfer oils from skin. Dr. Romano brought in Dr. Elena Conti, a specialist in trace evidence analysis. Using reflectance transformation imaging, Dr. Conti mapped 73 distinct handprint locations around the chamber perimeter. Nearly 4 handprints per person. They had been sitting facing the walls, and at some point or at multiple points they had reached forward and pressed their hands against the stone. Not casually. The pressure marks suggested sustained contact. Hands held flat against walls for extended periods, like they were feeling something, or trying to connect with something, or pushing against something only they could sense. In 2018, Dr. Romano authorized biochemical analysis of the groove that ran around the chamber perimeter. The organic residue found in the channel was complex, rendered bear fat mixed with pine resin, and traces of Humulus lupulus wild hopsa plant, known from later contexts for its sedative properties. Pollen analysis revealed the compound had been prepared shortly before use. The mixture was fresh when applied to the groove. But here's what made it significant. Thermoluminescence dating of heat-altered limestone fragments embedded in the residue suggested the compound had been heated before application. It had been liquefied, poured into the groove while still warm, where it would have solidified as it cooled. Dr. Romano consulted with Dr. Paolo Grimaldi, an expert in prehistoric ritual substances. His analysis suggested the compound might have been intended as a symbolic boundary marker, a purifying barrier, or possibly a slow-burning fuel source that would produce smoke and scent as it gradually consumed. Chemical analysis revealed partial combustion signatures. The compound had burned, slowly, incompletely, filling the sealed chamber with smoke, with scent, with chemical compounds that would have altered the already compromised atmosphere. And then came the final discovery. When archaeologists examined the skeletal remains more closely, they found something on the bones of 7 individuals, on the hands, on the fingertips, microscopic stone particles, limestone dust, embedded in microfractures in the bone surface. The kind of embedding that occurs when soft tissue containing particles decomposes against bone. 7 people had limestone dust on their hands when they died. Fresh dust, from recent contact with stone. They had been touching the walls, pressing their hands against limestone, and in the process their fingers had abraded against the stone surface with enough force to create dust, which meant they had been pressing hard, repeatedly, continuously, not gently touching, not casually resting hands on stone, pushing, searching, trying to feel something in the rock. The 19 people had entered the chamber. They had positioned themselves in 3 concentric circles facing outward. Someone had sealed the entrance, from the inside, spending hours stacking stones and packing mortar and earth until the only opening was completely closed, and the others had sat facing the walls while that work was completed. The compound in the perimeter groove had been ignited, slowly burning, releasing smoke and scent into the sealed space. And as the hours passed, as oxygen depleted and carbon dioxide accumulated, the 19 people had remained seated, facing blank walls, reaching forward, pressing their hands against stone, feeling, searching, waiting for something in the rock to respond, while the air grew toxic, while their breathing became labored, while consciousness began to fade. They had maintained their positions, kept their hands on the walls, until their bodies failed, until there was nothing left but bones in perfect circles and 73 handprints pressed into stone. Since the excavation, researchers have proposed multiple theories to explain why 19 people would seal themselves in a chamber and spend their final hours pressing their hands against walls. None provide a definitive answer, but together, they reveal the complexity of epigravidian spiritual practice. Some anthropologists believe the chamber was understood as a threshold space, a place where the boundary between physical and spiritual realms became permeable. By sealing themselves inside and creating specific atmospheric conditions through smoke and oxygen depletion, the group may have believed they could access another dimension. The walls weren't barriers, they were membranes. Pressing hands against stone was the method of crossing. Feel, push, connect. The altered consciousness from oxygen deprivation and smoke inhalation would facilitate the transition. The geometric arrangement individuals positioned in opposition facing outward created a structure, a pattern that would allow passage. They didn't face each other because they weren't meant to interact. They faced the walls because that's where the crossing point was. This theory explains the careful sealing to create controlled atmospheric conditions, the use of combustible compounds to alter the environment, the emphasis on physical contact with walls, the positioning facing outward rather than inward, and the apparent calm maintenance of position despite deteriorating conditions. But it fails to explain why the handprints show such force. If this was about gentle contact, about feeling for openings, why press hard enough to create dust? Why abrade fingers against stone? That suggests desperation, not meditation. It suggests they were trying to push through, not waiting for something to open. A more psychological interpretation suggests the group was responding to shared belief in something inside the walls, a presence, a power, a knowledge that could be accessed through proper procedure. The ceiling created isolation from contamination or distraction. The circles created geometric focus. Facing outward ensured each person engaged individually with the wall rather than becoming distracted by others. The handprints represent attempts at communication or extraction. Press here, feel. Something is behind the stone. If we press long enough, if we maintain position long enough, if we create the right conditions, it will emerge or respond or transfer to us. The death wasn't the goal. It was the cost of sustained effort. They pressed until they died, because whatever they believed was in the stone required that level of commitment to access. This theory explains the force of the handprints, the prolonged contact suggested by compression marks, the outward-facing positions ensuring each person engaged with their own section of wall, and the selection of healthy adults capable of sustained physical and mental discipline. But it offers no evidence of what they believed was in the stone, and it fails to address the geometric precision. If this was about individual contact with walls, why the exact positioning? Why the paired oppositions across the chamber diameter? That level of organization suggests collective purpose, not individual seeking. A darker theory proposes this was collective withdrawal, a decision by a specific group to remove themselves from a world they found unbearable. Perhaps they had witnessed something, experienced something, or learned something that made continued participation in normal life impossible. The ceiling ensured they couldn't be stopped or rescued. The circles represented unity and separation together, but each facing their own wall, their own darkness. The handprints weren't attempts to escape or to access something. They were final contacts, last touches of the physical world before consciousness dissolved. The compound burning in the groove provided ritual frame, but the purpose was simply cessation. They chose the chamber because it could be sealed. They faced the walls because there was nothing else to face. They pressed their hands against stone because it was the last thing they could feel. This theory explains the voluntary sealing, the selection of capable adults who could make informed decisions, the calm positioning suggesting acceptance rather than panic, and the absence of skeletal evidence of struggle or escape attempts. But it provides no archaeological context for such despair. The Epigravettian period in this region shows successful adaptation to changing environments, no signs of crisis, no evidence of catastrophic events, and it fails to explain the precision. If this was about ending, why the careful geometry? Why the specific measurements? Why the paired positioning? The most speculative theory suggests the chamber was an experimental space, an attempt to answer a question we can no longer formulate. Perhaps the group believed that specific geometric arrangements of conscious beings in controlled atmospheric conditions could produce observable effects. The ceiling created laboratory conditions. The circles created structure. The outward facing ensured each individual contributed equally to the pattern. The handprints on walls weren't seeking. They were measuring, testing, recording. Each person monitored their section of the perimeter, pressed, felt for changes in temperature, vibration, texture. The compound burning in the groove provided chemical catalyst or symbolic activation. They maintained position not because they were waiting for something external, but because they were creating something, becoming the experiment themselves. And when death came, it came as data, confirmation or refutation of something they believed about consciousness, geometry, and stone. This theory explains the scientific precision of the arrangement, the monitoring behavior suggested by repeated wall contact, the selection of adults capable of following complex protocols, and the apparent willingness to die as part of the procedure. But it assumes a level of abstract experimentation unprecedented in the archaeological record, and it cannot explain what question they were trying to answer. What could motivate 19 people to become experimental subjects in a terminal procedure? Here's what we know for certain. 12,000 years ago, 19 people gathered in a limestone chamber near what is now Matera. They were adults. They were capable. They were healthy people making conscious decisions. They prepared the space. They filled natural cracks. They carved a groove around the perimeter and filled it with a combustible compound. They positioned themselves in 3 precise circles. 8 people in the outer ring, 6 in the middle, 5 at the center, all facing outward toward the walls, backs to each other. And then one of them sealed the entrance from the inside, spending hours stacking stones and packing mortar until the only way out was completely closed. And the others sat facing blank walls while that work was completed. They ignited the compound in the perimeter groove. It burned slowly, filling the sealed space with smoke. And as the hours passed, as oxygen was consumed and replaced with carbon dioxide, they remained seated. They reached forward. They pressed their hands against the walls over and over, hard enough to leave marks, hard enough to create dust. They felt the stone while their breathing became difficult, while consciousness began to fade. They maintained their positions, kept their hands on the walls, until their bodies could no longer sustain life. Until they died sitting in circles, hands pressed against stone, facing walls in a chamber they had sealed themselves into. We don't know what they believed the walls contained. We don't know what they thought would happen when they pressed their hands against stone in a sealed chamber. But we know they believed it completely. Every fitted block in the entrance seal, every hour of work to close themselves in, every pressed handprint on limestone. This wasn't accident, this wasn't entrapment. This was choice. And whatever they thought they would find in the stone, whatever they believed their hands would feel, their geometry would create, their deaths would achieve. It was powerful enough to convince 19 people to seal their own tomb and spend their final conscious moments pressing their hands against walls instead of doors. The chamber is sealed again now, protected, silent. But the handprints remain. 73 impressions pressed into limestone, still marking the places where hands pushed against stone, still showing where 19 people reached forward into walls and found only walls reaching back. And 19 people whose final touches we can still trace are still there. Sitting in circles they measured themselves into, facing walls they chose over freedom, in a chamber they closed from the inside. If this story stayed with you, you're not alone. Camera del Silenzio remains one of the most deliberate discoveries in epigravettian archaeology, and it raises a question we may never answer. What could 19 people have believed was in the stone that was worth sealing themselves in to find it? If you want to explore more mysteries like this, choices we can document but never decode, geometries we can measure but not comprehend, stay with us. Every week we descend into the spaces where walls become questions no one answered. Leave a comment with your thoughts. What do you think they were trying to feel? And if this story affected you, share it. These handprints deserve to be remembered. Every seal tells a story. This one tells of 19 people who closed their own door and chose stone over sky. See you in the next enclosure.